If building muscle is so simple and having more muscle makes you stronger, then why doesn't every powerlifter and athlete look like a bodybuilder? Well, besides the steroids, of course. Stick around and find out because we're going to finally be going over hypertrophy. Welcome back, recruits, to the third Iron Strong session. I'm Coach Cayden, the owner of Iron Strong Training. I've been coaching since I got out of high school, and I've had the pleasure of training everyone from youth to pro athletes to everyday individuals. I've studied and taught all about exercise at the university level, and this is the third video in the series where I'm going to share as much of my knowledge and experience to you as possible. We're going to cover all kinds of fitness goals, how to train for them, and the science behind them. There is so much to go over about hypertrophy. So today we're going to set some clear objectives. Today we're going to define hypertrophy, exactly what it is. We're going to go over some of the prevailing theories and research about hypertrophy and the current guidelines and recommendations about training for hypertrophy. Let me start off by saying that we, exercise professionals and scientists, do not fully understand the why of hypertrophy. We understand mostly what goes in and what comes out, but we're still debating exactly why hypertrophy happens. What follows are some of the most common and highest quality opinions and theories held by professionals in the industry. Hypertrophy itself is just the enlargement of a tissue. Muscle hypertrophy is the enlargement of a muscle tissue. We look at the muscle's cross-sectional area, or the space when we cut it in half. Take a muscle, its outermost layer, and we can break it down into its own individual muscle fibers. Take those muscle fibers and we can break them down even further into myofibrils, which are this rod-like organelle inside the muscle fiber tissue. And even further, we can break down those myofibrils into sarcomeres, the smallest contractile unit of a muscle. Sarcomeres have actin and myosin, two contractile proteins. What myosin does is pull on the actin, sliding it together. It's called the sliding filament theory. When those slide together, it gets pulled into each other. It shortens the length of the sarcomere, the myofibril, and the muscle itself. That's called a muscle contraction. Usually it's the shortening part of a movement. Usually we consider this to be the concentric portion of an exercise. Sarcomeres can also lengthen along with the rest of the muscle in what we call an eccentric contraction, where it's still pulling, but now it is being forcefully stretched against resistance. This tension, mechanical tension, which when it comes to exercise refers to the pulling force produced by muscles during contraction, is somehow sensed by the muscle in the body, which signals to the brain that we need to adapt to overcome this physical challenge. This leads to muscle protein synthesis, which is the creation of new contractile elements like actin and myosin, but also structural proteins like titin and nebulin. This thickens those myofibrils, but also includes the generation of new ones. So now we have even more myofibrils and thicker ones, increasing the total cross-sectional area of a muscle fiber and the muscle as a whole. This is one of the most popular theories. Mechanical tension created from muscle contractions leads to muscle protein synthesis, and that leads to muscle hypertrophy. But I wouldn't be totally honest, and I would be excluding information if I didn't at least talk about sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. Sarcoplasmic hypertrophy is the increased disproportionate expansion of the sarcoplasm, which is a muscle's version of cytoplasm, something you might remember from your 5th grade science class. Sarcoplasm is the gelatinous, semi-fluid-like substance that fills all the space in between the myofibrils. The theory goes that the expansion is disproportionate to the number of myofibrils and the size of those myofibrils in a muscle fiber, which thickens the muscle fiber but doesn't actually add any ability to produce more force, which is why some people have bigger muscles but aren't as strong as guys who have smaller muscles. It certainly offers an explanation and viewpoint of the disparity between size and strength, although there's a lot other adaptations and physiology that we have to talk about when we consider those two aspects. And really, it's just trying to explain the difference in that size by increases in intramuscular fluid, glycogen stores, mitochondria, etc. It's thought that this comes from the high volume training that a lot of bodybuilders do and the stimulation of their energy systems that it causes. And a very popular theory of integrating sarcoplasmic hypertrophy with myofibrillar hypertrophy is the idea that sarcoplasmic hypertrophy is transient, that it expands the sarcoplasm before we increase the size of myofibrils or add more myofibrils to the muscle fiber. So we're still thinking of ways that both can be connected, and I certainly believe that we cannot have one without the other. You've probably had enough of this scientific overload, so let's talk about the current recommendations for hypertrophy. And they're fairly simple and encouraging. You see, reps and load are not as important to training for hypertrophy. You can still achieve discernible hypertrophy with a rep range of 1 to 30 and beyond, as long as it's paired with a load that takes you close to or achieving muscular failure, which is a phenomenon where the muscle cannot perform the movement anymore due to fatigue. This is why you often see intensity prescriptions in reps in reserve or RIR. This is a subjective measure of how many reps you have left in the tank. So if I have a 5 RIR, that means I have 5 reps left before I cannot perform the movement anymore. Yes, this is subjective. It's hard to have an active objective measurement there with hypertrophy and muscular failure. However, the more you train, the better awareness you have of how close you are to failure, especially if you go to muscular failure every now and then, and that keeps an idea of just how fatigued you are in your head. What research shows us is that we can still create meaningful hypertrophy by training anywhere from 2 to 3 reps in reserve. Like I said before, this just means we need to program a rep and load scheme that takes us close to that range of failure. I would generally not recommend training for hypertrophy with super high loads and low reps like 1 to 3. This is due to the high amount of fatigue these sets create and the long amount of time you have to rest in between just to fully recover and give it your all for your next set. Plus the increased risk of injury if you aren't fully recovered before you try and lift some very heavy weight that's going to require a lot of focus and physical demand on your body. On the opposite end of the spectrum, training with an inordinate amount of reps may also not be the smartest idea, simply because if you train with a lot of reps, your set will be extended in duration, which may cause your cardiovascular fitness to fail before your muscular fitness does. Still, it's not wrong to train these ways, and if you train smart, there's still absolutely viable options for training for hypertrophy, while also training for other types of adaptations. One of the most common ways of tracking progression and volume for hypertrophy is set volume, weekly set volume. The American College of Sports Medicine just released their position stand this year on resistance training, including hypertrophy. What they found is that training for hypertrophy was significantly enhanced by doing 10 or more sets per week per muscle group. That is to create a significant amount of hypertrophy for you individually. But what about the lowest amount of volume that we can do to still create some hypertrophy? When it comes to frequency, it's less about the actual split you're doing and more about what volume you're trying to get in a week. So what volume are you doing for these muscle groups or these movement patterns, and how can you slot those into the week effectively so you can still rest and recover in between? So what does this mean for actually training in your sessions and doing your workouts? Select a rep range that you enjoy, train with an appropriate load that brings you close to failure, and rest enough to fully recover before you go back into your set. This could be 2 to 5 minutes of rest for heavy loads and low reps. This could be 2 to 3 minutes for moderate loads and moderate reps, or 30 seconds to 2 minutes for low loads and high reps. It matters more about your enjoyment of how you train and the time you have allotted to complete your training session than it does really about the load and volume you're doing. As always, train with good controlled technique and a simple progression plan where you're adding more reps and weight every week so that you can continue to build muscle. Thanks for watching. I hope we cleared up some of the misconceptions about hypertrophy, and now you know how to train a little bit more efficiently. If you still don't know how to go about your training goals, click the link in my bio and fill out the coaching application so we can work together and find the right plan for you. As always, leave me a like and subscribe to join the Iron Strong Army, and comment below if you have any questions or there are any future topics you want me to cover. I'm Coach Cayden, and remember, forge your own destiny.